Hello, everybody. Welcome in to a special weekend update of the NBA Front Office Show because we've got a new collective bargaining agreement. The NBA and NBPA have come to a tentative agreement. That means there will be no work stoppage. Not that we ever thought there was going to be, but nice to know that we have an agreement and we've got some new rules coming to break down. Joining me is Keith Smith. Keith, of course, the NBA has to do this at like 3 in the morning on a Saturday, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was one of those things where I was trying to stay up because I got word from a source that they were not going to meet the midnight deadline,
Mhm.
but that it was going to happen. Like they were basically they weren't even going to put out like a hey we've pushed back or anything like that
Right.
because they knew it was that close to done. So it was one of those things where I was like, all right, I'm going to stay up, I'm going to stay up, I'm going to stay up, and then I woke up at like 5:30 to a million tweets and other things and messages and all this stuff. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I was like that kid trying to stay up to catch Santa, and I just couldn't do it. I crashed out and woke up, and the tree had presents all underneath it in the form of new CBA stuff.
Adam Silverclaws showed up when
That's it.
while you were snoozing there.
And now we
So
get to
there's
do front office Saturday. I'm not going to yell though. That's only for Fridays. That's
yeah,
a
that's
Friday
only for
special,
Fridays.
and you want to see that? You got to catch us live on front office Fridays.
That's right. That's right. Always a good time on our live show on Fridays. But let's break down what's new because I think that's what everybody wants to know is what is changing now in the NBA as a result of this new CB. And I guess first let's start um, big picture. When does this go into effect? Let's start there. And while you're talking about that, I'm going to get the graphic loaded here for our first topic.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at here is barring something very, very unexpected. This will start on July 1st. So that means it'll start with the new league year. That's almost always how these things go. There's some buzz out there that maybe they could do the extension stuff as an addendum to the current CBA to allow for guys who can extend through June 30th of this year to
Mhm.
maybe take advantage of the changing extension rules. But that's pretty unlikely to happen. So I think any of the stuff we're about to talk that we know for a fact is in the new CBA, and then there's some things we're going to talk we don't know about yet. But any of the changes that are coming CBA wise, that's going to come July 1st with the start of the new league year. So we'll still be working under the current rules for the rest of this year. The good news is it's a 7-year agreement. Mutual opt out after 6 years. Very common. That's the way the last few CBAs have run as well. But at least the next 6 seasons, we're going to have labor peace. We won't have any kind of work stoppages or anything like that. As you said at the beginning, we didn't expect one because, as I'm fond of saying, half a watermelon is better than a whole grape. And that's where we're at right now, where these teams are making a ton of money. The players are making a ton of money. There's a new TV deal coming. So everybody just kind of chose, let's keep things moving.
All right, let's start off. In-season tournament. It's here. Could be happening as soon as next season.
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of negative reactions to this on
Yeah.
social media. And I think there's still confusion about what this is going to look like. From what I've seen, what's been put out there, the only addition in terms of games played, it's going to be one extra game, and that's just for the team that gets to the championship round of this in-season tournament. Otherwise, they're just taking regular season games and having them double up and count as tournament games as well. I don't I don't see what the big deal is here. I don't particularly see that as a major negative because if you want to just ignore the tournament, then ignore the tournament, and they're all regular season games. But otherwise, it's just a little something extra. I don't know. I don't look at this with the negative lens that I'm seeing out there frequently on social media.
I'm with you. I don't get it either, right? People hate it on the play-in tournament too, and now I
Hmm.
think pretty much everybody loves it. I think we're all big fans of the play-in tournament and
Yeah.
think it's a lot of fun and in that. And this in-season tournament, there's two components here. One is you put a trophy in front of competitive people, whether that's coaches, front office folks, or players, they're going to want to win it. That's just how it works. They're going to want to go out and try to win it. The other
Kid, you
thing
should
is,
have heard me yelling on the soccer field this morning, right? And these are 6-year-old girls, 6 and 7-year-old girls, and I'm yelling on the soccer. I mean, if you're competitive, and there's some sort of competition, you're going to be interested in it. You're going to want to win. It's the way it goes.
See, exactly it. There's also a $500,000 prize. And now I've seen people like, why would Stephen Curry care about that or LeBron James? They don't necessarily for themselves, although LeBron, just tweeted yesterday he's not paying for Twitter. So I think LeBron will take 500K. I mean, why not, right?
Notoriously frugal billionaire LeBron James.
Yeah, that's it. Right. Hey, sometimes you gotta, save money where you can. That's how you become rich. Or so I'm told. I don't know. I'm still working on it. The other thing though is what's more important is 500K is a lot of money to the guys who are on minimum deals and the guys who are on two-way deals. So they are going to want to win that for those guys. They're going to want to get those guys paid. Players love stuff like that. Anybody who thinks that's not a real thing, like you've never spent any time in a locker room and those kind of things. They love when other guys get paid. So they're going to be thrilled to death for that stuff. It's going to take a few years of this to get fully ironed out and for people to adopt it and be like, hey, remember, like, that's cool, and it'll be one of those things where, all right, in the rebuilding year, we still won the, silver cup or whatever the heck the thing's going to be called. And we still, won that and, off we go. I think the other thing is, as far as the schedule goes, like you said, the pool games, I'm kind of wondering if the pools are just going to be the divisions.
Yeah.
And you play, and then the division champs and maybe a couple wild cards are the teams that advance out of that. And then that's how we go with them. And maybe it's, the top two teams and a couple wild cards or something. So we'll see what that looks like. So they're just going to double up as regular season games. So
yeah,
games you would have played on November 1st, it's going to count as a tournament game and a regular season game. So no change there. When they get into the elimination point, that's where it could get a little weird, right? Because now if I've got an elimination game as the Celtics and I'm playing the Lakers, does that really and we were supposed to play in March in Boston, is that now going to be played in December instead? That's point. What we don't know. We don't fully know how that's gonna work out yet. But my guess is it's a lot of smart people working on this. They're gonna figure out a way for it to be as low impact as possible, and we'll be just fine.
Yeah, agreed. And I'll tell you what, one of the things that really helped with the whole play-in situation was the first season of play-in. You got Lakers versus Warriors in a game that was fantastic. I would love to see something similar to that happen with the in-season tournament, where you get a really good final that's a lot of fun. Maybe between like two young up and coming teams or something, just something that everybody really gets into. That would go a long way towards getting that acceptance. Because you're right. Right now, it's a lot of negativity, a lot of pushback, all of that. Again, I don't see it, but I'm hopeful that we will go down that same path as the play-in did. Because once we saw that, everybody went, okay, this is kind of cool.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's going to be fine in the end. I think it'll be really, I think it'll be absolutely fine eventually. And then 10 years from now, it'll be one of those things where people are going to care and they're going to want to win this for whatever reasons it is. And it may be that your top tier contenders with a bunch of veterans don't put a ton of priority on this. And that's fine too. It's, that's how it's handled in these European soccer leagues. Some teams put a ton of priority on it. Other teams don't. Some teams don't until it's, oh wait, we can win it now, let's try to go win it. So it's just let's just kind of enjoy it for what it is. We'll figure this out, and I guarantee you the vast majority of the people who today are like, I don't like this and I don't want this, are going to end up being fans of it in the end.
All right, let's move on. Load management, something that has been a major talking point lately in the NBA, and for good reason. Fans have been frustrated. You pay a lot of money to go to a game, and the guy you want to see isn't there. Some of that risk is just inherent within sports, but it's becoming to a point where teams or fans kind of have to look and see, okay, is it the second night of a back-to-back? All right, then this guy's probably not playing, and I'm not going to spend my money on that game. And that's not an ideal situation for the NBA. So now the rule is going to be that in order to qualify for the big awards, we're talking like MVP, Rookie of the Year, things of that nature, six-man, you will have to have played in at least 65 games. And we've talked about this before about trying to figure out exactly where that number should be. I'm assuming the league did a deep dive into okay, what's the average number of games played? What do we really want to see? Probably had a lot of back and forth. But what are your thoughts on them landing on 65 games?
Yeah, it's roughly 80%. It's like 79 point something percent of the schedule. So I don't think it's too bad. I think it's Tom Haberstroh over on Twitter has been tweeting out, of the MVPs, of the, other awards who would have
Mm-hmm.
been eligible, not eligible. For the most part, everybody's been eligible. The main guys would all probably get to eligibility this year. And I think had this been a known thing, definitely would get there.
Yes.
Then again, remember, not does not matter this year. So, before anybody like gets all worked up because this comes in at this starts with July 1st. So I think in general, I think it's fine. I think they picked a pretty fair number. All of the reporting that is out there, and from what I've been told directly, is there are conditions in there where the
Oh.
65 game played threshold can be tweaked. And that may
Mm-hmm.
be, but we don't know what that looks like, right? The main idea, I think, of this is hey, you want to rest guys, you can still rest some guys. Even if you wanted to rest your guys on every back to back and trust that they're also going to stay healthy the rest of the year,
Mm-hmm.
you could do that. Teams only play somewhere between 12 and 16 back to back games now. It's very, that's been majorly minimized.
Right.
So that's where we'll see, how this comes together. But again, I think I think it's a little bit of a band-aid. One thing to be wary of, I don't want to see in March and April. All right,
Oh,
well, we rolled out MVP candidate X for a minute,
a minute.
and first whistle, we're pulling them off the floor because then
Yeah.
the whole thing turns into a farce.
And beyond that, we talk about what comes to mind first for me is we talk about the prevalence of betting in sports now, how that's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. There was a situation, I believe this was last season with Draymond, where Draymond Green was he wanted to be on the court for what was that? Steph Curry breaking the record?
Klay Thompson's
Klay
return game.
Thompson. Oh, Klay Thompson's return. That's what it was.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm spacing on that, but Klay Thompson's return. He wanted to be on the floor for it. Everybody found out that he's going to be on the court for the opening tip and then immediately come out of the game. And so everybody just bet the under on Draymond Green, and then you had a big problem on your hands, right? Like that could be a potential hurdle where if we know, hey, a guy's just trying to hit the 65 games and he's only going to play a minute, suddenly that becomes something that you have to be aware of, right? And it's a complicating thing. So I think you're right. I think there needs to be something in there to prevent that kind of circumvention where a player plays for a minute and then you sub him out. I think if it's 20 minutes and you just say, hey, we're trying to lower his minutes, that's a different story. But if it's something where it's clear you're just trying to get around the rule, the NBA's got to have a way to step in and stop that.
Yeah, and that's what I think what the ideal here will be is let's lean towards more in-game load management. The Clippers, good example last night.
Yes.
We're recording this Saturday. They announced Kawhi Leonard wasn't going to play in the second half of their game because they're planning to play him again tonight. He's going to play both ends of a back-to-back for the first time in years. So that was, their way of saying, all right, he's going to be out there, but we're going to play him. This is how we're going to treat this. So I think that's probably what we'll see more of. Drew Holiday was a good example last year. In the regular season finale, needed one more game played to trigger bonus language. So the Bucks put him on the floor, played the tip, he committed a foul, and he left the floor. And that was the Bucks kind of right at their own expense,
Right.
Allowing him to hit his bonus money and getting his bonuses to trigger. So, it's one of those things where, again, all of this stuff, a lot of it we've got to take very much we got to wait and see approach to this, because otherwise, if we get too worked up about it right now and start hating on it, you're going to go in with a really bad attitude towards it. But that doesn't mean it's all perfect either. There's definitely stuff still to be sorted and figured out with this.
Okay, let's talk about the thing that can definitely impact contracts moving forward, the standard veteran extension increase, which goes up from 120% to 140%. Keith, you and I were talking a little bit this morning, right when I did the same thing you did. I woke up and saw the news and everything, and my initial thought was, I don't know if that's enough to get some of the extensions done that we're talking about. Specifically, the first player I thought of was Kyle Kuzma. I know you went to Jaylen Brown. I don't think this is not like Kyle Kuzma's not signing an extension even with a 140% increase. So I don't know if they went far enough with this. That's my initial thought on this, but I'm sure there's something else that I'm missing here. What are you thinking on this?
Yeah, so for Kuzma, even at 140%, really all this can do is take him from the 13 million he makes up to about 17 million and
Yeah.
change. So that's just that's I guess it's a little bit more than that, but it's about 18 million or so. But that's not like that's just not going to be enough for him.
Yeah.
Now, Jalen Brown, what I like to call Jalen Brown is he's a near max player because he signed for just below the max amount that he could get. So for him, this could take him up to the next max salary tier. But in his specific case, it's even if they say, hey, we can start these tomorrow, he's still not going to sign it because he'd rather wait and see if he makes all NBA and then qualifies for what people call the super max, which is that
Right.
Third salary tier, the 35% of the cap tier. So it closes the gap some. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't close the gap for the two players I called out, Kuzma and like Domantas Sabonis, guys who make under 20 million. It's just not going to close the gap enough for them to push them into, hey, yeah, let's do this, especially if they're thinking, hey, I'm going to clear 25, 30 million, or I'm a max guy in my next. I would have liked to have seen them do something where, hey, here's your options. You can either, once a player is extension eligible, you can offer him a max extension, or you can offer him 120%. Or maybe you go to 130 or go to 140, whatever it is. But keep that max option open because then it's an option for the team, it's an option for the player. And that to me would be now, it can't be somewhere in between. It's either you give them all everything they can get off of you, which is all the way up to their max, or we're going to give them, less than that. And I think that would have been a better way to handle these because then the Sabonuses and Jalen Browns of the world, those guys could get a lot more money. And then if you're the Wizards and you're like, Kuzma, we can't, like, we're not giving you 40 million a year because we think you're a 23 million a year player. Kuzma can say, that's cool. Let's just wait then and see how it plays out. And we'll go into free agency because that's always an option as well.
Yeah, I think there is of course, always the flip side to all of this. And I think you kind of touched upon it there. So, like when we go back to the Supermax, when that first became a thing, I always think back to DeMarcus Cousins, where the thought was, okay, this is going to allow even small market teams to keep their players. And in fact, it caused the Sacramento Kings in that case to say, well, we don't want to pay him that. Let's trade him. And they wound up trading him to the Pelicans. So I do wonder if you do that, right? And I think they didn't go far enough with this. But the flip side is if you go farther and you say, okay, you can have the max, well, every player is then going to demand the max. And that puts pressure on the team to give them that dollar amount. Now you can say, well, teams need to be, they need to be diligent and they need to have their own kind of willpower and not just fork over that money and everything. But it would create another point of contention between the player and the team potentially. So maybe that was part of the thinking in terms of why they stopped it at 140.
Yeah. And I just think it's one of those things where it's kind of like, I don't know, like I need to, paint my house. So I painted the front of my house to get the HOA off my back. But like, I'm not going to paint the sides and the back because who cares? No one will see it. Like, it just feels like, all right, you did something, but you didn't do enough, right? You didn't really fix the problem. I was trying to keep it a little more lighthearted here on a Saturday morning than like go into the whole, like, treating a wound or anything like that. So I don't want to go
with a Band-Aid over a bullet wound or something. Yeah. I got you. Yeah.
What did Taylor Swift teach us? Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes, right? So it's one of those things where
you would know better than I would.
Oh man, I have a nearly 13-year-old daughter. Taylor Swift is heavily in the rotation. I'm not gonna lie, I don't mind. I'm in. I'm in on Taylor Swift. I enjoy
a big T Swift fan here.
Yeah. Not big enough that I'm paying for those concert tickets.
Well, yeah,
that's a whole other story and podcast. So it's good. I just think it could have been better.
Yeah, I think they could have gone farther with that, but it's something. All right. One of the other problems they were trying to address was teams that they felt like could just. I don't know if anybody thinks this is really possible, but the fear is that teams will be able to spend their way to a championship, right? Golden State the Clippers being the two teams that frequently get brought up as teams that are just spending, 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 spending. And for good reason, because they do have very, very high luxury tax bills and all of that. And I think it's not even necessarily a concern about spending their way to a title. Like, teams don't want that, but they don't want the expectation that you're going to spend your way to a title, because then if it's like, hey, the Clippers are spending, the Warriors are spending, other teams have their fans look at them and say, hey, those guys are doing it, we need to spend. Mm-hmm. Teams don't want to be in that situation. So what they're doing is creating a second luxury tax apron, where if you are, 17.5 million above the tax, then you will not have access to the taxpayer mid-level exception, which means your options in terms of actually building out a roster are even further limited if you are too far above the luxury tax. This is interesting. This is an interesting change, and it's a pretty significant one, because it means, in theory, you shouldn't see, like, we get those guys that are pretty good and the market just isn't right for them or something to find a long-term deal, and next thing you know, they're signing a 1-year contract for the taxpayer. Second time bringing him up in the show on this show, but DeMarcus Cousins back with the Warriors did the same thing. That, in theory, goes away with this new rule.
Yeah, I don't like this one. I think this is very much a we're gonna try to curb this as much as we can, but I think all you've done here is you've cost players money. Because now, there's generally going to be 4 to 6 teams in this position, each season. So I think that's fine, right? Like, that's not so many teams that it's, crazy. I think people have got a little up in arms because for years now, or at least the last few years, it was the Warriors, the Clippers, and the Nets. And they were outspending everybody by, a huge margin. I think the issue in this situation here is you're trying to solve for something that I'm just not sure is the problem they think it is, because not every team is always going to be in that position. We talked about this a little bit with the Clippers, where we might see the Clippers just kind of rolling it over, because eventually down the line they could move on from George and Kawhi and go a different direction that way, and do by turning them into the next expensive guys and just keep things moving. It's rare that a team like the Warriors, who's mostly drafted and developed with a handful of key trades, are going to come to prominence like this. So just to give everybody too a little bit of a refresher, how it works exception wise is, if you're under the cap, you get the room exception. So I always think of the room exception as, hey, you were under the salary cap. Here's a little bonus for you. Once you use your cap space, you've got a little bit more money that you can spend then on top of it.
Which this summer it's going to be what, about 5? I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, I'll pull it up. It's going to be a little bit more than that. It's going to be room exception. This summer projects to be about 5.8.
Okay.
With this summer. Then if you're between you're over the cap, but you're not over the current tax apron, you get the non-taxpayer mid-level. Now, it's a little weird, and it's not the best named thing, because you can be a taxpayer and get the non-taxpayer mid-level. It just becomes harder to use it, but you can. But so anyway, that this coming season projects to be about 11.4 million. Then if you're over the tax apron, you will get the taxpayer mid-level of about 7 million. Tax apron currently, the original initial tax apron, whatever we want to call it, is about 6 million over the luxury tax. So you get your luxury tax line, you're about 6 million past that, you get the non-taxpayer. Now, in the future, if you are range between 6 and 17.5 million over, you'll still get that. If you go over 17.5 million, you don't get any kind of exception at all. In your stock, you're using minimums, and you can sign your draft picks, and that's it.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but off the top of my head, as I recall, it's going to be 170 for the luxury tax, which would put us right about 187.5 roughly for where that season line. Yeah, for next season. But just because that's going to be a factor as we're looking ahead to who can spend what and how much and all that.
Yeah, tax projects to be 162 next
Okay.
year. The tax
So
apron will be somewhere, the original tax apron will then be somewhere between 168 and 170 million,
okay.
pending on, just the actual
So it's
raise
about
on that. And then the tax apron will be about 100 and then what's that, 179.5 million.
okay.
So,
So that's the number to base this off of that we're going to be looking at
yep.
for where teams will lose access to the tax pyramid level.
Yep. And let me look it up because it's really the only teams it would apply to right now are the Warriors and the Clippers. The Clippers would not have it. They project to be about 39.8 million over the tax next year, and the Warriors they're at 51.9 million, so they would not have it. Everybody else would be in range, I think. Yeah, even the Celtics would still be in range to get it. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. We'll see, ultimately where it all goes. And then like teams like the Bucks, pending, what they do with the resigning Chris Middleton and the like and all of that.
Yeah. Yep.
So
So
the main reason I don't like this is it just takes money out of the players' pockets because you're gonna have somewhere between 4 and 6 guys that then have to sign a minimum deal that
yeah,
could have signed for 7 million. And that's not cool. I don't know. I don't think this is gonna fix things the way they hope it will.
that was what I thought as well, was that this ultimately it's going to cause I don't know that it's going to prevent that solid player from getting to that team that's already spending so much. The
Mhm.
guy's just going to have to go there for less money.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we'll hit a point, right, where okay, if it's the tax pyramid level, most teams are going to have used that, okay, or used their mid level, and then the teams that are competing for that guy that's kind of floating out there that the market never developed for, that wants to sign a 1 year deal somewhere, that guy is probably going to be looking at a bunch of veteran minimum offers, and if the team that's spending a bunch has a really good team, and the money is all the same across the league, that's probably where they're going to wind up. So if
Yep.
in any like you could wind up making things even more even
Less
lighter in terms of the,
competitive.
the hit to the
Yeah.
pocketbook for some of these
Sure.
teams.
Yeah. Yeah. And less competitive the way they build up the rosters because
Yeah,
now it's, oh, Team X doesn't have that to offer me anymore. So I guess I'll go here. And that still exists today. It's just a little different. But yeah,
I
again, we'll see where
I
this goes.
understand the thinking behind it and everything, but sometimes we see unintended consequences with this stuff,
Hmm.
just like we've seen,
Yep.
with shorter contracts has
Yep.
created the player empowerment era, and players have more ability to team up and all that kind of. That certainly wasn't what ownership had in mind when they shortened contracts and said we're not doing 7 year deals anymore and all that. There's always unintended consequences to things, so that it's going to be something to keep an eye on. Okay, let's move on to this one. I like a third two-way spot gets added in. So now, rather than having two-way contracts available, there are now 3 two-way contracts per team, which I think is excellent. I think it allows teams to keep players that are in their system under their control. Remember, in the G League, another team can make an offer to an opposing team's G League squad, to a player on that team, and grab them. And so now that's one more player that you can have essentially protected on a two-way deal, plus another player that you can have playing in regular season games for you. And it just incentivizes teams that much more to continue to build out the G League. And we've seen tremendous growth there over the time of its existence, going all the way back to when it was the D League to now the G League, of course. So I think this is, I have zero problem with this. And I think it's a necessary step forward as the G League is becoming a more and more legitimate path into the league.
I like it for all the reasons you laid out. I am a little concerned as we talk about unintended consequences
Uh-huh.
that what we've already seen happen is teams are leaving more standard roster spots open than ever before,
Oh,
and they're
good point.
leaving them open longer than ever before. I mean, Boston's been sitting on one for a long time. Lakers have been sitting on one
Yep.
for a long time. And part of that is we'll just use our two-way guys if we need somebody. So they just bring the two-way guys in there. You add a third player to that becomes a little bit, more of a challenge. Now, the other part is too, unless there's something coming which we haven't heard of, is our roster size is increasing. Roster sizes are only 20 in the off season. So what happens in this case is now you only have 2 guys you can bring really to training camp. to kind of be your training camp bodies. Now you could bring in 5 and let them fight it out for your last couple roster spots on standard deals or convert to 2Ways or whatever you want to do. That's fine because it's 20 total spots. But it's just you're running the risk here, I think, of costing some guys jobs that might have had spots on standard deals. Now, I think that's outweighed, to be fair, by let's continue to make the G League a little more relevant. Let's make it a little more let's beef it up in terms of its stature. Let's add a couple more NBA level guys into the G League just so we can see it. And again, for players, this doesn't necessarily change a ton from if you don't want to be on a 2-way contract, you don't sign one. Just sign a standard G League deal. And then you're still an NBA free agent. If somebody wants you on a 10-day or wants to call you up permanently, they can. And that still exists for players to do now. So I think the benefits outweigh the non-benefits here. But I think it's one of those things where, again, let's give it a few years. Let's do some analysis and see, hey, our team's really leaving more roster spots open, because if they are, that's an unintended consequence of this.
That's a good thought, and I hadn't considered that you're going to see more teams doing this where you don't sign that 15th roster spot. Little bit of a surprise, maybe that I'm sure the ownership would have pushed back on this, but that they didn't just say, well, you have to sign 15 players to a roster then, because you're right. I think we will see more teams do that and keep the savings.
And to be fair, there are rules on the league has to average 14.5 roster spots across the entire league, or there's penalties and all this sorts of stuff. So there are those things, but that's, and you're always going to have some teams that are going to be like, hey, if we have 18 spots to fill, 15 standard and 3 2-way, we're filling them because we want as many guys available to us as we can have. But you are going to run into some other teams that are like, we're good. Like, we don't really necessarily need to do this. And we'll see how it comes together with this third 2-way and stuff too. But that's another thing I'm curious for. Another thing on the long list of things I want more details on out of this whole thing.
And that's what we're going to finish with in just a moment, is stuff that we need more information on. But lastly, no change to one and done. So that was a big talking point for the initial term of the conversations here. But ultimately, they decided to just leave it alone, which means we won't have players coming in directly from high school, which means you're also not going to have that like super draft year where you wind up with high schoolers plus guys who have had a year of college experience coming in.
Yeah. Now, some people have said, well, then more kids are going to reclassify and just leave high school earlier. The NBA still has an age requirement of 18. So you still got to be, over 18 at the time of being drafted. So you're not all of a sudden going to see, 16-year-olds classify, regraduate, or graduate early because they reclassified, then declare for the draft. They still wouldn't be eligible. So I think 3 things happened with this. Teams didn't want this. Teams didn't want to be scouting high school kids again. If you talk to anybody who's been in the NBA long enough, they will tell you absolute nightmare going to, the hundreds and thousands of high school gyms all around the country because somebody, called somebody up and said, hey, there's this kid, in rural Vermont who looks like he can play. You better go check him out. Like, that was miserable. And nobody wanted to do that. The NBPA didn't want this openly. Tamika Tremaglio, the head of the NBPA, said, we don't want guys coming in and forcing our veterans out of jobs, because that's what was going to happen. Every kid who came in at 18 straight out of high school, that was one less roster spot for a veteran guy unless you really started increasing roster spots. Then you had, at the college level, the NIL deals come in where guys can start making money right away in college, and some guys are making a ton of money as college basketball players and doing quite well for themselves on NIL deals. Plus, you have all these pathways that have opened up, whether it's the G League Ignite, it's Overtime Elite, it's some of the Australia's Next Stars program. Some guys in the past have just gone and played in Europe. So all those paths are still open. So I think if the kid doesn't want to play in college, he has a way to make a ton of money going and playing places for 1 year before he gets to the NBA. If he wants to play in college, it goes. And I know anybody who loves college basketball is like, this sucks for college basketball because these kids come, they play 1 year and they leave. I get it but that's not the NBA's concern. They don't really care about college basketball. That's not their
Yeah.
concern to make sure it's live and well. Like they don't really care about that. So yeah, no change here. This one started to seem like really over the last, I want to say even 6 months. It's like, who's fighting for this? Like, because neither
Right.
side wants it anymore. And now we're in a position where it's like, this would be like, I want pizza for dinner. No, I want pizza for dinner. Like,
Wait a
so,
minute.
wait, let's
Yeah.
just get pizza, right? Like this was like, yeah, it's just weird. So yeah,
AKA the conversation that never happens in my
yeah,
house.
right? Yeah, tell me
what,
about it.
what do you want? I don't know. What do you want? I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay. Well,
yeah, pretty rare. It's like once a month, maybe. It's like we all want that. Wow, we all want the same thing. All right, let's go. Then
monthly
it turns
calendar.
into where, like, especially if it's pizza, like where are we getting it from, and
Oh yeah.
what kind of pizza, and that becomes a whole other argument. And I just sit there hungry the whole time.
Like, I don't just order it. Okay, let's get into the things we don't know. So we'll run through this. Cap smoothing. We don't know if that's going to happen, or I would assume. I mean, it's something that was certainly discussed, but this is just information that hasn't come out as of this recording. Here we are on Saturday. So when the TV deal hits, there's going to be a big cap spike if there's no smoothing. This is how Kevin Durant wound up with the Warriors last time around when we had this happen. Big cap spike. Suddenly the
I
Warriors
like that's
had
the
money to
one
sign
you
Kevin
went
Durant.
to.
Well, why wouldn't it be? Isn't that the one everybody thinks of?
Yeah, sure. No one thinks that Luol Deng and Timofey Mozgov getting
No. But I
drastically
mean, but look, that was the Lakers signed some bad deals. I'm talking
sure.
like that. Kevin Durant winding up with the Warriors had a much bigger impact across the
Yes,
entire NBA,
for sure.
besides the Lakers doing stupid
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. It's what happened with this was the NBPA when the NBA said, "Hey, the cap's gonna go way up," and it went from, just so everybody knows, it went up $24 million in one uh, season to the next. Went from 70 million to 94 million. What happened was the NBA said, "Hey, we should smooth this out." As they should have at that time. The NBPA was like, "Yeah, right. We're going to
Yeah.
trust you about as far as we can throw you. So no, we're going to let this run," because I think the relationship was not great back then
No.
between the league and the Players Association.
And they would have to trust that the money was coming down the
Was
road. Like,
Yep,
hey, we won't give it to you now,
absolutely.
but we're going to give it to you a year from now, 2 years from now. And they're like, no, we want all of our money now, which
So
that made sense.
what happened, in addition to the Durant situation and a couple other guys landing places that they wouldn't have, is all of that summer's free agents got massive contracts. And it lasted for exactly one summer, because then the next summer, the next free agent cycle, teams didn't have that same kind of flexibility in cap space. So you went from teams that were like, all right, we're only going to have about 10 million in cap space, to all of a sudden it was, holy crap, we have 30 million in cap space, because
Yeah.
it's just, when the cap goes up 24 million. So the thought is out there that this time around they'd smooth, but I don't know. We're going to see. If not, you guys, in a couple of years, you better be tuned in to the NBA front
Oh
office
my
show
gosh.
live on free agency opening day, because Trevor and I are probably going to be losing our ever loving minds here. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you what, too, if there's no cap smoothing in this, teams are going to have a couple seasons to set up.
To get ready
We're
for
going
it.
to see a lot of maneuvering over the next 2 years, both with player contracts and with teams side maneuvering to, hey, I want to have 100 million in cap space this coming summer because I'm going to load up and go after everybody. We're going to see stuff like that happen.
I want, even if it's just an April Fool's joke, to be the moment that we find out that officially there's not going to be any cap smoothing. I want Luol Deng to announce he's returning to the NBA.
Coming back.
I think that would be fantastic.
That'd be
That would be the
amazing.
greatest troll announcement ever.
Right?
The luxury tax bans, we don't know if those have changed at all. Like how much, like where the bans sit, how much, because it's not just you get into the tax and then it's a set amount forever. The
Yep.
amount that you pay in tax goes up the farther into the tax that you get. And so we don't know if that has changed. Has the distance between the bands changed? Has the amount changed that each band represents in terms of making the luxury tax that much more punitive? So that's something that we'll still wait to find out, because that's another thing that could definitely change team spending habits.
Yeah, absolutely. Because right now they go up about every 5 million, up to 20 million, and then from there it's like dollar for dollar and all sorts of penalties on top of it. So what happens now? What some folks have said is, "Hey, what's that at 5 million?" Because that was roughly the taxpayer mid-level amount
Hmm.
when those bans were set. It's time to expand those bans to maybe every 7, 8, 9, $10 million because the non-taxpayer mid-level is now jumped to, like we said, it's going to be 11.4 million
Yeah.
next year. So we're into a different whole different stratosphere, and it's probably time for that to change.
Yeah. Okay. We also have the extended trade rules. Will that change? Will those rules change and open up some new avenues for player movement, some new options for teams? Um, I don't know. Like this isn't something we heard a ton about, but if you're changing the extension rules, it stands to reason that maybe there is a change here as well.
Yeah, the extend and trade are just extremely restrictive. You can only give the player a very small raise, and you can only add a couple years onto their deal. So that's part of the reason why we see. So, like LeBron, when LeBron signed his deal, he was over raise wise what he would have been for an extend and trade. So that's
Hmm.
what triggers that whole 6 month trade restriction. And that's why the guy can't be traded because in an extend and trade, if a player is moved, they can't be retraded for 6 months. So that's kind of how they rebalance those things out and close those loopholes. So yeah, it's a little bit of a weird spot for sure to see. So we don't exactly know how that's going to come together yet.
And then trade requests slash demands. Was anything done to prevent them? There was talk about this being an issue, but is it even a fixable problem? Because here's the issue, right? Is so many players just say, I didn't request a trade
Yep.
because they didn't, but everybody knows what was going on, right? Like they do it behind the scenes, they do it in way they, the player themselves, of course, doesn't say it. They don't say it publicly, but everybody knows that's the message that was relayed. And then how do you prove that? And like I mean, what do you do? The agent gets into an elevator and with the GM and gives him a hug, and instead of saying "Hail Hydra," he says, "We want to trade." Like, I mean, what do you
Right.
like? You're going to get some crazy shenanigans in order to get
Well,
around
you
this.
get
So
Eric
that's how do you
Bledsoe,
police it?
right? Eric Bledsoe was just unhappy at the hair salon. That's all.
Exactly.
Oh, it
Right.
was. Yeah, it's one of those things where I think this was more, yeah, we don't like this and we want to talk about it, but I think you're right. I don't know how you fix this. I don't even know if it is a fixable thing. And honestly, is it really that big of a deal? I
Hmm.
say it all the time. I don't like when a guy is a year into a contract. It's the same thing with tampering for me. The guy's like a year into a contract. Yeah, that's not cool, right? Like you shouldn't be going after somebody who's on somebody else's team without working through the front office to try to make
Hmm.
a trade happen. But on all this trade stuff, teams can turn around and trade players almost whenever they want. I don't have a problem with the players expressing the same interest when they're under a contract.
Yeah.
And tampering, I'm well on record. The contract's coming up and ending. Let them go. The minute day the season's over, let them start
Yeah.
talking to whoever it is. Like I don't really care about that stuff.
Agreed. Agreed. Changes to rosters. Are there more changes beyond the third two way spot? I don't know what else they would change.
Yeah,
Uh,
my thought on this one is could you bump it up to like 22 guys
sure.
come into training camp? Could you say every team has to fill a minimum of, 14 spots and you can only drop below 15 for short amounts of time, those kind of things like that. Those are the things I'm a little interested in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then lastly, expansion, which is a thing that we've talked about a ton on this show. Nothing official on expansion. We know that the league wanted to get through the collective bargaining agreement, wanted to get through all the TV stuff, and then they would start to address expansion, but nothing official on that in terms of how are they going to narrow it down to a certain number of cities? When are they going to be doing that? How long is this whole process going to take? When do they envision a new team actually coming in? Because remember, even once they announce expansion, it takes a few years to get all the infrastructure in place and everything to bring a team into the NBA. So I think expansion is coming, but will we find out more when there's further details that are released in this CBA?
This one interests me just because if they did some refining around the expansion language in the CBA, then that says to me even more so it's
It's
coming.
coming.
And
Yeah.
it's coming in the life of this CBA. That So we'll see with that. But yeah, I firmly believe expansion is coming. They just have markets that are sitting out there with so much money that are ready. And you have places like Seattle completely renovating their arena with the idea of only just the hockey team being the tenant, in Las Vegas, completely building an arena for just because like there's
Yeah.
expansion is coming. It's like the worst kept secret in the league. It's just, if they refine to the expansion language at all, then that says to me, look for an announcement here within probably the next 3 years or so, and then a new team within probably the next 4 or 5.
Yep. Las Vegas, Seattle, keeping an eye on you. I'm sure some other teams will try to get into the mix, but something we will talk about extensively. Keith, 45 minutes on a Saturday and a bonus show? Not bad for front office fans, huh? Breaking down this whole thing. But again, thank you to the NBA for releasing that at like 3 a.m. on a Saturday. But nonetheless, glad we could hop on here and work through everything.
And now I'm gonna go take a nap.
That's right. It is time. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you do subscribe right here to the NBA Front Office YouTube channel. If you're a podcast listener over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, make sure you give us that 5-star rating and review. Till next time, see ya and stay safe.